Hi, fourth graders. This is Mrs. Wise here with you, and today we are starting a new story. It's called John Henry, and I'm excited to introduce this to you. We'll be reading today in pages 65 through 68 in your text collection, the book that looks like this. So we are on starting on page 65, and it just has a few notes about the story at first. But we will be reading about story themes revealed through dialogue and description through this tall tale. So again, it's called John Henry, and here we go. Notes on the story. After the Civil War, the Chesapeake and Ohio Railroad Company laid hundreds of miles of railroad track through West Virginia. These new railroad routes opened up timber and coal lands and created new towns. When the tracks reached the Alleghenies, the railroad company hired more than 1,000 laborers to build tunnels through the mountains. The tunnels were created by blasting through the mountain shale. This work was done by steel drivers, men who drilled steel spikes into the solid rock. Once the holes were drilled, they were packed with dynamite. Since the early West Virginia tunnels had no safety regulations, these tunnel workers were exposed to an early death from the dynamite explosions, falling rock, and lethal dust created by the blasts. That sounds crazy. Starting in the 1870s, a black steel driver named John Henry became the subject of many of the work songs sung by railroad tunnel gangs. Like most work songs, the John Henry songs consisted of a few short lines repeated several times with pauses in between for the stroke of a pick hammer. Historians disagree about whether John Henry was based on a real man or not. Some believe that he can be traced to John Hardy, a true-life subject of popular ballads, who also was a superior steel driver. Others believe that a man named John Henry actually worked on the Big Bend Tunnel in the Alleghenies. Whether John Henry was real or mythical, he was a very strong, enduring character in many Southern black laborers. Later, when songs about him were recorded and played on the radio, he became known to the general public as well. All right, so that was a little bit of background about this passage, and this is kind of where the story begins. I want to show you the illustration. Here's the first one, and here we go. Because the illustration was, the whole page 66 was taken up by the illustration, I'm now beginning on page 67. The night John Henry was born, the sky was black as coal. Thunder rolled through the heavens, and the earth trembled. "This boy is special," the preacher said as folks gathered in the cabin by the river to see the new baby. In the dim lantern light, John Henry was the most powerful-looking baby folks had ever seen. His arms were as thick as stovepipes. He had great broad shoulders and strong muscles, and as folks stared at him, he opened his eyes and he smiled a smile that lit up the southern sky. When John Henry raised his arm, folks gasped and brought their hands to their faces, for they saw that the mighty baby had been born with a hammer in his hand. Then they all began to laugh, and they felt happier than they had in a long, long time. John Henry grew up fast in the world that didn't let children stay children for long. Before he was 6, he was carrying stones for the railroad gangs that were building tracks through the land of West Virginia. Okay, page 68, if you'd like to follow along. By the time he was 10, he was hammering steel from dawn till dark. No train whistle in America sang as loud as John Henry's mighty hammer. It rang like silver, and it shone like gold. It flashed up through the air, making a wide arc more than 19 feet, then crashed down, driving a steel spike 6 inches into solid rock. By the time he was a young man, John Henry was the best steel driver in the whole country. He could hammer for hours without missing a beat, so fast that his hammer moved like lightning. He had to keep a pail of water nearby to cool it down, and he wore out 2 handles a day. All the railroad bosses wanted John Henry to work for them. When the Chesapeake and Ohio started making a tunnel in the Allegheny Mountains, they asked him to lead their force of steel-driving men. Soon John Henry was whistling and singing in the early summer light as he walked to work in the mountain tunnel. Beside him was his wife, Lucy, with eyes as bright as stars and hair as wavy as the sea. Lucy was a steel driver herself. At noon, she drove the spikes while John Henry sat with their little boy, Johnny, in the sunny mountain grass and ate his lunch of ham hocks and biscuits with molasses. Lifting Johnny high into the air, John Henry shouted, "Someday you're going to be a steel driving man like your daddy." July of that summer was the hottest month on record in West Virginia. Working in the terrible heat, many of the steel drivers collapsed by noon, but John Henry tried to protect their jobs by picking up their hammers and doing their work too. One week he did his own work and the work of 4 others as well. He hammered day and night, barely stopping for meals. All right, and that's as far as we're going to read today. I hope you enjoyed the beginning of John Henry. Thanks for reading with me today.